welcome to the Linux Spotlight. This show is dedicated to showing off the best thing about Linux, our community. This community is made up of developers, distro maintainers, YouTubers, and everyday users. Each one plays a vital role in our community, and the goal is to have a discussion with each individual about their journey into Linux and beyond. So join me now as we turn the spotlight on. Hello, I'm your host Rocco, and our special guest today is none other than Sean Davis. Sean, how are you?
I'm great. How you doing, Rocco?
I am doing awesome. I have coffee, and we're going to talk about Linux, so that makes it good.
It's a good combo.
That is a good combo. So, I don't think there's many people that don't know who you are, but just to go through a little bit of it, you are an Xfce core developer. You are the technical lead of Xubuntu. You have been a guest on Destination Linux at least twice, from my recollection. You are a maintainer of projects like Catfish, Parole Media Player. Give me some other ones. Light Locker settings.
MenuLibre is a big one.
There you go.
Yeah,
but
a few.
Let me start out by asking you, who is Sean Davis personally?
I am a number of things. So during the day, I am a web developer at a private company, which I won't talk a lot about today. I am a Linux geek. I enjoy anime. I enjoy movies. I enjoy running in the morning. I enjoy tinkering with hardware. A variety of things.
Right. All kinds of different things. See, this is what's great about this specific show is that people get to know who you are personally. So you mentioned running and anime and stuff. You have a favorite hobby outside of Linux?
Oh gosh. Probably anime. That's the thing I seem to spend the most of my additional time on.
All right. So you're a web developer during the day. So tell us what exactly your job consists of.
It's a lot of maintaining integrations and building reports, and I kind of do a lot of specialized like iOS web development because we have a fleet of users that basically run on their phones. And I do a lot of that.
Right. So I take it that nowadays, apart from years ago, it makes it difficult because everything has to be compatible with everything now, including the mobile area.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So, we're here talking about Linux, and, I'm not looking at you like you're crazy, and you're not looking at me like I'm crazy, but that's not what normally happens in real life. So do you find people are receptive to Linux in your area as far as when you mention it?
I try not to mention it often. It's kind of a weird talking point because, you bring it up and then you have to explain it. I mentioned it at work one day and they're like, oh, go on. And I, tell them that I do, development on this free operating system. And they're like, well, who's paying you? And I'm like, nobody. I'm doing it for free. And that was a very difficult point to drive home. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a difficult point. Now, have you been able to get anybody interested in it to try it out, or is it just something that they're not going to do?
I've not been able to push anybody kind of over the edge on testing it, or even playing with it. But where I work, it is in use more than probably a lot of workplaces. So my entire web team, we currently all use Linux. I recently switched to a Mac, but that's kind of beside the point. Our engineering department uses Linux. I see Xubuntu a lot, which is kind of cool.
Very nice. So we will get into Xubuntu and all of the Linux stuff. But before we do that, where did you start with computers? Like, what was the first computer that you used?
The first computer I used would probably be in kindergarten. We had these two Macs in our class, which primarily had games. We did a little bit of typing on them. And I guess at the time, computers were still new enough that was a big deal when there was like a computer day. So it was a lot of like, here's how you type, here's how you open up this video game. It was a lot of cool stuff that we kind of take for granted now.
Right. So you learn it in kindergarten, and I guess you progress. When is it that you get your first computer at home?
So my grandpa had like an old 486 machine that had Windows 3.1 on it. And I played with that a lot. And then when he upgraded to Windows 95, I got that 486 computer, which was a lot of just, playing around in DOS and a little bit of typing and manipulating Windows, using defrag a lot, just because there wasn't a whole lot you could do without the internet.
Right.
Even then. Played a lot of DOS games.
So you installed Linux on it the next day, right?
No, Linux came a little bit later.
When do you hear about Linux?
So first hearing about Linux was a little bit down the line. My uncle had come back from the military, and on his very chunky laptop, he was running a copy of Red Hat, which I thought was cool, if nothing for the fact that it was different than everything else. It looked it looked the same as Windows, but with a few more flourishes. I think it was running KDE. And I thought that was neat.
So is he a Linux geek as well, or was that just what he had on it, like from somebody else?
I think at the time he might have been a Linux geek. Nowadays, I think he's just kind of moved away from that. It's not really his thing.
Yep. All right, so you see this Linux operating system on his computer, and it's cool because it's different, but how do you get from there to the point where you want to try it yourself on your own machine?
So after seeing it then, my other uncle also purchased a copy of Red Hat at some point and had it on his machine for a while. And then he went back to Windows, and I didn't see it again for a while until probably middle school. A couple of the computers in the computer lab had some Linux on them. I don't remember what it was. But it was kind of things like that where every few years I keep seeing it and it's like, oh, this is neat. And I kept getting reminded of it until later on, whenever I have a newer computer that can do more things like connect to dial-up internet.
That was awesome at the time, huh?
That was awesome. With the exception of back then, to connect to the internet, you had to get a client application to actually be able to make that connection. And they didn't make those for Linux. So after spending hours of downloading an ISO and putting it on the computer, reboot, and now I don't have the ability to get the internet.
Wow.
So shortly lived, put Windows back on it, wait until the future whenever I have better internet.
Right. So when does that future come? At what point do you get the better connection and you start using Linux?
So I think I was in high school, and then I was able to convince my mom to upgrade to DSL, which removed the client connection issue, and always connected. So at this point, I'm now able to put Linux on the computer and actually leave it on there. And since everybody's just using the internet to look things up, they don't need any Windows specialty software. So now it's a matter of going back and forth between Windows and Linux on my home computer, which everybody else is using.
All right. So you don't seem like you had any fear of jumping in and trying Linux. What are the pros and cons to the first experience you had with it?
So the reason I didn't have any fear is because I regularly broke Windows, and I was reinstalling that a lot. But as for the pros and cons, the main con was not being able to use the internet on a lot of scenarios. Dial-up was still pretty prominent, DSL not so much. As for the pros, at this time in high school, the Linux desktops starting to get a lot more attention. So I was experimenting with OpenSUSE and with PC Linux OS, which were both very much focused on making the desktop run and work well.
Right.
And that was, just pretty cool. So the desktop was, a pretty okay thing then. And then eventually I learned about Ubuntu, and this is like 504 that I learned about it. So I ordered some Ubuntu disks, got them in the mail, shared them with some friends, and pretty much fell in love with Ubuntu at that point, because even though OpenSUSE and PC Linux OS were really good on the desktop, Ubuntu kind of was taking that to the next level, even that early days.
Yep. Even then it was doing that. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So once that point happens and you install Ubuntu, do you stay with Ubuntu, or do you go back to Windows or Mac?
So from that point, it was a lot of dual booting. So while I'm at home, I'm dual booting Windows and Linux. And then when I went to college, I'm dual booting still, but now I've kind of swapped it. And now I'm primarily in Linux full time, basically able to either use all of the native Linux applications to do everything I need to do, get the campus specific software running in Wine, or worst case scenario, I can fire up a Windows virtual machine to accomplish those additional side tasks. So I was primarily Linux from the point that I hit college.
Very nice. Now, do you still use Windows in any way, or Mac? Well, you mentioned you use Mac for work, but
yeah. So on my personal laptop, I have Windows on there. I used to boot into it to play video games. Now I boot into it once every couple months to run updates, and then boot back to Linux just to keep it alive. At work, I ran on strictly Xubuntu for 4.5 years, but with where I've recently been spending more time kind of doing iOS-based web development, there's no better way to debug that than with a Mac, because those tools just aren't available outside of that area.
Right. All right. So how do you make that transition from a guy who runs Linux to being a Linux contributor to projects?
So primarily I was using Linux full time, but I had some issues with it, noticing, things here and there, missing icons, things not seeming intuitive. So I start reporting bug reports. And then once I start reporting bug reports, I can't seem to stop. So I'm just pushing all these bug reports, and poor Simon on the Ubuntu team at the time was answering all of my bug reports, following up with me. Eventually, I think he got fed up with the surge of emails he was getting about it. So he dragged me into the Ubuntu development chat, where I, instead of reporting bugs, now I start, finding people to fix them. Or in the case of Xfce, I start being the person that gets to fix them.
Hey, that was a good move on his part. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, it worked out well, I think. Yeah.
So how long have you been contributing to Xfce and Linux in general?
So my first contribution, for college, I had a senior capstone project where I made a personal backup program, which was basically, load up the program. It would automatically find your documents folder, pictures folder, etc. And it would just back that up to an external location. And I made that cross-platform, so it worked on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And since I was, full-time Linux at the time, that was like my primary interest. So once I graduated college, I'm still interested in doing open source stuff now that I've, done one. And in 2012, I started out reporting the bugs, and midway through the year, I'm already writing the code to fix those bugs and pushing those contributions forward.
So you start out with that project. That's your first project. Do you have a favorite one that you worked on?
It'd probably be a toss-up between Catfish and Parole. Just because I've spent a lot of time with other contributors kind of refreshing both of those applications, make them work really well. Catfish is a lot of fun because as I make minor improvements, the performance grows substantially. So Catfish, gets faster and faster with each little thing I do, which makes it a lot of fun. It's very interesting in that way.
Right. So Catfish is a file search program, one of the best on Linux right now. So you said Parole Media Player. Why is that something you specifically started, or you started contributing to it?
I started contributing to it. So whenever I started contributing in 2012, I think Parole had kind of more or less been abandoned for a year and a half, maybe 2 or 3 years. So the code base was just the main contributor for it was kind of missing in action. So that was just kind of getting it up and running, and then the libraries it was depending on were being deprecated, so it was a lot of porting and stuff, and really just a complete rewrite of Parole over the time that I've been working with it.
MenuLibre, is that something you created, or is that a project you contributed to?
That is a project I created.
That is one awesome project, I can tell you that.
Yeah, so there was an Ubuntu application showdown in 2012 where the grand prize was it's a little handheld computer. I think it was like the NX or something. I forget what it's called exactly. But I really, really wanted that. So, and I knew a la carte was not the greatest software. It was pretty buggy in Xfce at the time. So I hit the ground running with MenuLibre, and I thought I did pretty well. I forget where I ranked overall, but I did pretty good. There was a lot of contributions for that showdown.
Well, MenuLibre, it allows you to make changes to the actual menu. So you can edit items, you can edit icons, you can add shortcuts to the menu if you want to. This is one of those programs that, there's not a huge need for this. But man, when you need it, you need it. It's one of those programs that fills that spot that you're like, yes, I can do that. Mm-hmm. So that is much appreciated. So along with your Xfce contributions, when do you get involved with Xubuntu?
Kind of happened in parallel. So when I first started contributing to open source, it was reporting bugs to Xubuntu about Xfce applications, largely. And since both the teams are kind of closely mixed, that was a lot of, hey, come in and join the chat. Great, now you can start working on this. This is who you need to talk to. Come over to the Xfce development chat. So they kind of happen hand in hand. And even now, if I'm working on any project on a given day, it's either Xfce, Ubuntu, or both.
Right. So Xubuntu Technical Lead, what does that exactly mean for you? Like, what is it that you do with Xubuntu?
It's a lot of talking to people, keeping up with, upstream changes both in Xfce and Ubuntu, and then working with other developers to make sure that every release every 6 months is going to work correctly and we're not going to have any surprises.
Right.
It means it's a lot of time looking at defaults and working with the others and kind of coordinating meetings to improve those defaults. And yeah, I think that encompasses the role.
So how long have you been the technical lead?
Oh gosh, a couple years. I don't remember exactly when, but the previous technical lead had kind of gone on hiatus. He kind of disappeared for a little bit. People weren't able to reach him. And I was there at that time.
That's awesome. You know what's awesome about it is the whole story of starting out on Linux, starting to report bugs, adding to the code, fixing bugs, that kind of thing. And then just kind of working your way up to being where you are today, which is now you being the technical lead. You guys just put out, I guess they go hand in hand. the Xfce 4.14 release goes hand in hand with Ubuntu. You just put that out. Tell us about it.
It's a big release. It took us 4.5 years to get it done. The main reason for that, we don't have a lot of contributors on the Xfce side as far as development goes. The kind of development it is was not the most exciting. The whole plan for the release was we're not going to be introducing new features. We need to port to GTK and all the newer libraries. And Xfce is a pretty old project. So the current state of the code base was kind of early days of GTK2. So there's a lot of things that weren't available in the toolkit at the time that we had implemented on the Xfce side. They later became part of GTK. But that meant first porting the code to the latest version of GTK2, making everything work there without any custom things. Then bringing it up to GTK3, where there's a lot of code that's been removed or replaced because GNOME has been changing a lot and it's kind of changed their own desktop paradigm. So a lot of the features we depended on, we now had to custom write, especially for GTK3. So suffice it to say, it's not the funnest sort of development when you're porting large projects and kind of keeping up with an upstream with a moving upstream.
Yep.
But we did it. Everything's ported. Everything's working great. We had some initial bugs, initial days. I think we've already got releases out to address those. And a lot of people are not going to notice a difference because we kind of made it look identical. Largely, we've made a few, usability improvements and graphical improvements here and there, but largely it's still the same Xfce, just modernized.
Right. But I think that's part of what people would expect, that they wouldn't. The Xfce users are very dedicated. And one of the reasons why they're dedicated is because of the stability of it. So for them to have an updated release for it to work well as GTK3 and then not notice the difference is actually kind of, I think, what you would want.
Yeah, that's the success story there. That's what we wanted.
Yep. All right. Is there anything in were you able to get out everything in this release that you wanted to?
Largely, primarily, yes. Because a lot of it was getting everything where we needed it and kind of in a release ready stage some time ago, and then moving on to a different component, and then coming back to each one and then making small improvements or adding new features and stuff. Obviously, there's some things that our users would have liked to have seen. Like everybody's always asking, does it support Wayland? Is it about to support Wayland? When's Wayland happening? And then there's the flip side of people are like, well, GTK4 is right here. You guys are just making it GTK3. I think development-wise, our team achieved all the goals we wanted to and brought in all the features we wanted to get in there. I think some of our users may not be fully happy with everything that we got and the things that we didn't get that maybe they were expecting.
Right. Well, you mentioned about GTK4 and stuff like that, but you as a team can't look at other people as your goal to say this is where we need to be. You have a responsibility for Xfce to make it the best it can be right now. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. So you've been developing for years, contributing to projects. If somebody today asked you, like, I want to get into developing, what tips would you give them to help them out?
The main one I would give would be find an issue that annoys you and just start hacking on it. Find a fix, ask people, try to start getting answers from there, or even join the development chat and ask specifically, where you can go with that, or you run into an issue or roadblock and figure out with others where to go from there. A lot of times we'll have people that are interested in developing, and they'll come to us and ask, okay, where do I start? And, we'll point them towards the documentation, and then they'll ask, well, what bugs can I work on? And we'll point them to the Bugzilla. But I think a lot of times people will come in and say, all right, there's a list of easy bugs. I would like to, take a crack at that. But the reality is, if we had a list of easy bugs, we'd have a list of fixed bugs. We would have already taken care of them and moved on to a lot of the more critical issues. So we are huge fans of well-documented patches. So if you find a bug and you fix the bug, you give us a patch, and we'll happily merge it in, or we'll give you direction on how to improve it so that you can.
So just basically open the lines of communication.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I know that you're an Xfce guy, but I am a distro hopper, and even if I'm not a distro hopper any longer on my main machine, I still have a test machine sitting here to distro hop on. Do you distro hop?
Not anymore. Mainly because it's a pain to get my development environment back where it needs to be. Back in the day, I distro hopped all over the place. Though I wouldn't stay steady on any distro, on any machine, any desktop environment. I started with KDE. I moved to GNOME with Ubuntu. I moved to Unity with Ubuntu. Then when the Xubuntu guys started making work on their desktop, I moved to Xfce, and then basically hopped back and forth between Xfce and Unity for a while. When GNOME Shell was being developed, I was super excited. It looked awesome. I was ready to go on it. The day it was released, I tested it out. I'm like, no. Went back to Unity, went back to Xfce. And I played with Elementary here and there, but I always just kind of come back to Old Faithful.
Now, is it something that, you said you don't distro hop anymore, but is it something that being with Xfce that you're looking at the other projects to see what they're doing? You're maybe downloading an ISO, testing it out?
Yeah, so that's something that I personally do, and I know a lot of the others do as well. I try to keep up with the various desktop environments and Mac and Windows, because I borrow ideas regularly. I try to improve where we can. There's a lot of things where it's like, well, that's a lot more usable there. Let's see how we can adopt that if we can, and if it makes sense for us.
That's awesome. And because there are some people that, like, don't want to even hear the word Windows, don't want to even hear the word Mac, but not everything in those systems is terrible. All of it is mostly terrible, but what I'm saying is not every idea in there is terrible. If there's something that works better that we can implement into Linux, let's do it.
Yep.
So, yep, I totally agree. So, you mentioned you were on KDE, you mentioned you were on GNOME, Unity, and all these other ones. What was the main reason or reasons why you chose Xfce to stick with?
There's basically two reasons. One is speed. So every time I would use Unity or GNOME or any of the larger desktop environments, like, it would feel really nice, and all the animations were really nice, and just everything looked good. But the moment I'd switch back to Xfce, I'm like, wow, everything's way faster. Applications load faster, Windows drag faster. Great. Okay, I'm sticking with Xfce. I don't have the money to dish out on the latest and greatest hardware. And then reason two would be consistency. Because even while Xfce is a modular desktop, I feel like everything feels more cohesive in Xfce. So if you're like in KDE, or if you're using like Qt apps, they look good in Xfce. But if you're on a KDE desktop and then you're using like a GTK application, all of a sudden that looks very out of place.
Right.
Same thing even with like Elementary. Elementary apps all look great in Elementary. Use a non-Elementary app there, and all of a sudden it feels wrong.
Right. Yeah, and this is true. Now, they have made improvements to KDE with the Breeze theme, so a lot of the apps are more cohesive now. But if you change from the Breeze theme to another theme, it is exactly what you're saying. Like the theme, the apps just don't. They just look out of place. So, now you mentioned that one of the reasons why you stopped distro hopping was because you didn't want to have to set up your system constantly. So what is your daily workflow like as far as software is concerned? Like, what do you need to install when you redo your system?
The main things I really need, so I need the Xfce development environment, which is, you know, if you're an Ubuntu desktop or a Debian desktop, it's sudo apt install, you know, build dependencies, and you just stick out all your applications. That takes no time. But getting my editor ready to go, I use Visual Studio Code, absolutely fantastic editor. Takes some configuration to make it the way I like it. I depend on Brave browser, which is a Chromium fork. It's really fast, it's secure, and it's the one browser I can use that doesn't cause my laptop to overheat. I've been using MailSpring recently for my mail app.
Very nice app.
It's very nice, very good looking. It's got some syncing issues occasionally, so I'm still partial to Thunderbird. And then I also depend on Spotify because I need to have music. I don't want to pay for music. I don't want to steal.
Agreed.
And my day-to-day workflow, so basically I get up, open my mail app, try to weed through promotions and bug reports, fire up my browser, I go look at Twitter, follow up on any kind of, you know, news there, hop on IRC, respond to people, play some music, video, or podcast, either on my phone or through my speakers on my computer. Go to work, come home, then I either goof off or I hack on Xfce or Ubuntu.
And every once in a while, throw a game in there.
Yeah, occasionally. Not on my computer anymore. It's a bit old and a bit hot, but I play a lot on my PS4 and my Switch.
Nice. So is there any software on Linux that is not currently available that you would like to see?
Yep. I would love to see Creative Suite on Linux. That's basically the one thing stopping my wife from moving over. If we can get that, and I don't really want to run it in Wine just because I would like to have some stability there. And then the one other thing, if I can get the iOS development tools natively on Linux, I don't need any other operating system. I'm solid. I don't have any reason to switch or dual boot. It's all there.
Right. Well, that would be awesome. I can't promise you that'll happen tomorrow, but that would be awesome.
It might be a while for either of those.
Yeah, maybe. So, you know, a lot of times when we talk about Linux, we talk about it, or I talk about it specifically. I can't speak for you, but I can speak for me that I usually talk about it as the Linux desktop. But Linux is like so much more than that. It's everywhere, from servers in the cloud to Mac machines to schools and restaurants and colleges and everywhere. Where is it that you see, where does Linux stand at in your mind?
It's like you say, it's everywhere. It's pretty ubiquitous. It's when you're checking out at a store, it's on the POS machines there. It's on the printers everybody's using at work. It's on their phones, whether they're running iOS or Android. You know, they're running on top of Unix at the very least. And I guess the kind of fun thing about that is when you're in the know, you know everybody's using Linux and they don't. So it's kind of a secret.
That's a good way to look at it. Well, you know, so many times I've been somewhere where, like, I was at a grocery store and the video machine, the video rental machine, had some type of a screen on it that, I guess it was an error screen, but it was actually a Linux-based machine. And it was awesome to see, because you just don't think about that. You look at a video rental machine and you just don't automatically think Linux. So, some people are of the mind that or Linux itself is bad at marketing. Do you believe we're bad at marketing the Linux desktop, or do we even need to market the Linux desktop?
Yes, we are not good at marketing it at all. The best marketing I've seen for it, Xfce has a number of videos on YouTube where they've got like music video parodies and stuff.
Yep.
Fantastic stuff. And then I've also seen them advertising on like Netflix and stuff. Like they're out there, they're actually doing the legwork on that. And I think that's amazing. Everybody else, not so much. The marketing's not there. We're not putting the resources into it. And largely, the people that are inside of Linux, we are not that kind of creative. We're not, the marketers, the people that are professional marketers aren't coming to Linux in droves, mainly because none of their tools are here.
Right. Sometimes I think Microsoft is a better marketer for Linux than Linux is.
Everybody's talking about that terminal video, and it's really great. I saw that, and I saw everybody talking about that. I'm like, we should do that. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to fire up Blender. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, no.
I'm not doing that.
No, that was actually a great video. So it's not something that I could create. I can tell you that. All right. So I will always say that, the community is the best reason to run Linux. It's the best thing about Linux. But, there's other reasons like customization, speed, like you were talking about with Xfce, flexibility. What is it that drives your love for Linux?
Probably the main thing from me would just be the stability. Preface that with I don't run Arch. So basically, I can guarantee that when I run an update, my computer is going to reboot, and it'll reboot instantly. It doesn't have to install updates. It's not going to fail. I'm not going to get a surprise update that's going to break everything. And I can literally run the same install for as long as I want, and it'll just be fine. Yeah.
By the way, I don't run Arch.
Exactly. I did have a bad update once that broke everything, and that was running Arch in a virtual machine. So there's that.
Wow. Well, I have run Arch in the past for a couple months. It was actually before this Pop! OS install. It was one of the longest running installs I've had on my machine so far. And I can't say that it's terrible on stability, because to me, it's not. I just think that it's always in the back of your mind that, all that has to happen is once. And it's in your mind that, do I hit that restart button or not? And you really got to keep up on the news for Arch, because sometimes they'll put up, don't update it, and sometimes you're not always aware of the news. So, yeah. All right. We used to have a bad reputation around the Linux community. And, I have to say that some communities are better than others in this area, but for being unwelcoming and unfriendly. Now, this is improving all the time, but what can we do to make that experience better as a community?
I think the best place to start would be less RTFM and more knowledge sharing. A lot of people will ask questions. Usually, I see this because I'm asking the same question, and somebody will say, well, just Google search or just go to this wiki. And that's not helpful. I can do that at Google search. That's how I got there in the first place. I can go to that wiki. Now what do I do? And I think a lot of us, at some point in our Linux careers had that same question, and, either done a ton of searching to find the answer, or maybe even wrote that documentation. Instead of telling somebody to just go figure it out themselves, provide that information, give them that little boost, help them along.
Right. I mean, it's okay to provide a link, but you should go that one step further and explain things and explain what they're looking for. Like, we always talk about this and we say about, oh, well, just Google search it or whatever. And all I can say is some people are better at searching than others. The search terms, you're only as good as the search terms you put in. If you're not really good at putting in the right search terms, you're not going to find those answers you want. So, yeah, that's definitely not the answer. So let me ask you, have you experienced this whole RTFM mentality?
Yeah. Oftentimes, if I have a question, that's all, I find that I'll either run into that or run into pages where somebody else has asked that and kind of gotten that answer, or maybe there is just a link without an explanation and that site's gone. That site's no longer there. That information's lost. Not having that background, I don't have a way to move forward now other than digging and hoping I find the right answer somewhere.
Well, that's actually a good point, because there's so many times that I've went to threads to say somebody will ask a question and somebody else will reply and provide a link and say, here's the answer to the solution. Or here's the solution to the answer. Yeah, that's it. Here's the solution to the answer. And then you go to that link and it's a dead link. So it's like, then you're back to square one. So that is very frustrating.
Yeah. It's more frustrating after you see that and then you see the follow-up comment. Thanks, that did it. That was exactly what I needed. Oh.
Let me ask you, you maintain a lot of these programs that we talked about. You maintain Xfce and Xubuntu. This is not always easy. There are problems with this stuff. Can you give us an example of like one of the major problems that you solved and how that felt?
There's a number of them.
Go ahead.
Well, all right. I'll be here all day. Probably the easiest one that I'm a huge fan of. So whenever I added like the device switcher, it's like the Pulse Audio plugin.
Yep.
That made, getting your outputs go into the right place a lot easier. There's a running gag that audio doesn't work in Linux. I think that helps bridge that gap a little bit.
It does.
Of course, if you're not using Xfce or you're not using Pulse Audio, I can't really help you there. So pick and choose.
Right.
Another issue that we ran into, so for several releases, there's been an issue for like locking your screen in Xubuntu, depending on your hardware. And for most people, locking your screen, unlocking your screen works perfectly. For a select few people, for some reason that we can't seem to track down, you lock your screen, it's not coming back. You are now black screen. You got to reboot.
Wow.
We finally have a solution for that. And the solution for that was writing a new screensaver. But, that's what you got to do sometimes.
See, this is what people don't see. All of this stuff like you have this problem and it's really only for a select few people. But in order to fix it, you have to do this mound of work to rewrite something. So that doesn't get put out there that often. So I appreciate that, man. All right. How is it that you learned what you know or Linux or development in general? Did you learn best by reading wikis, or obviously when you started there wasn't YouTube videos, so how is it that you learned the best?
Finding knowledge experts is usually a great way to go, but oftentimes you don't know where to find them. Now that YouTube is so prominent, and a lot of Linux enthusiasts are on YouTube and they're posting videos and how-tos and they're really enthusiastic about what they do, I think people should start at YouTube to learn or at least get interested or figure out what they can do with Linux. As for me, if I couldn't find a knowledge expert, it was really a lot of Google searching, a lot of hoping that somebody answered this question somewhere. Maybe there's a code sample. Maybe the documentation's clear, or maybe I just have to guess over and over and over and over until I figure it out.
That's not always fun, let me tell you.
No, it's not.
All right, so let's talk about your YouTube channel. You do have a YouTube channel, although it's not updated regularly. You have videos on there about stuff you've been working on, like Catfish.
Yeah, I don't publish there frequently. I would like to, but it takes a lot longer to make a video than it does to make a blog post or show people some screenshots or even write code.
Right.
So it's like, all right, wait for a lull, maybe after release, then do a YouTube video, share it, see what traction it gets. I would like to do more video. My plan is to do more video. I'm just not doing it currently.
Well, in between all of your free time, you could put out a video, right?
Right, yeah. On my way home from work when I'm driving and stuff.
All right, so in the broad scheme of things, where do you think Linux is headed? Do you think that we will ever see the golden year of the Linux desktop?
I don't think we're going to see necessarily the year of the Linux desktop at this point, mainly because I think when we coined that term, we weren't expecting tablets to have taken off like they are. I don't think we, outside of like, Star Trek, had envisioned tablets as being a thing that would happen. But I can see Linux just everywhere. I know a lot of gamers now have Linux as an option with like Proton coming forward and making games either instantly compatible or developers helping move it along. And really, people, extreme gamers are using their computers to run games for one thing, and that's, playing games. If the gaming is available on Linux, now they can move to Linux, and we've got more people on Linux. And I think that gaming will kind of lead the way to getting more people on Linux. It may not be on the desktop. It might be on a tablet. It might be on a phone, where there's a lot of developments happening in all these spaces now.
Right. Well, Valve and Steam alone has done so much for the Linux community in bringing things mainstream. And we were actually talking on Biddle the other night about like a new user experience with Steam. And one of the things that was said was that you can use Steam on Windows and you can use Steam on Linux, and it's exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
The app is the same. The way you join games is the same. And that's not always said for other programs. So they've done a ton of work and, made a ton of progress in that area.
Mm-hmm.
If you could change one thing about Linux, what would it be?
I'd like to see a lot more development kind of happening Linux first. I know that's always been the dream for Linux developers and Linux users, but I feel like with Proton showing that, a lot of these things that are kind of built, for Vulkan or whatever, they're kind of semi cross-platform by nature. And I think, various games that are running on like Unity, I believe there's to extend it to additional desktops, including Linux, there's not as huge of a requirement these days. But I feel like if Linux is in people's minds at the beginning of a project, I think they're going to be able to release it to Linux, Mac, and Windows. And I would just kind of like to see that kind of become a more standard mindset for the teams behind these projects.
Yeah, it's like the whole chicken or egg scenario. You need programs to bring people to Linux, but in order for the programs to be there, you need the people to be there to buy the programs. And like, it's just a cat and mouse game. But I hope that the more that Valve chips away at the gaming side of it, that is the catalyst that brings the change through the whole system, through all of the apps that, bring them. I don't want to say, some people will say, well, you don't want, the masses to use Linux. Well, I don't necessarily need Linux to be the most popular desktop, even over Windows or Mac. I just want it to be more popular than it is.
Yeah. And I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with the masses using Linux. I mean, if more people are using an operating system that's secure by default and respects your rights by default, I think everybody benefits.
Now, do you consider like a Chromebook Linux? I mean, is that a success in your mind as far as considering people using Linux?
I think so. And it might not necessarily be a success as far as like people using Linux, but people considering other options besides the set-in Windows or Mac. And I think once they start considering other options, Linux becomes visible and becomes viable.
Yep, it opens the door and opens their mind to that there's other options out there. I'm not locked into this.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, so thinking back of all the reasons that you chose to use Linux, Xfce, speed, do those reasons still apply today?
Probably more than ever. So I can still customize everything. It's still super fast. It's still super stable. I've been using the same laptop with Xfce for, 5 or 6 years now. I'm still able to run it like a champ. I want to do more stuff now, so I am, looking to buy a new desktop soon so I can play games. But absolutely, it's still customizable. It's still fast. It's still stable. I can do whatever I want.
And on that new laptop or on that new desktop, there'll be Xubuntu, right?
That's right. And hopefully, making high DPI and Xfce a better reality.
Nice. Is there anything else you'd like to share with people?
Well, so we just had Xfce released a couple weeks ago after 4.5 years of development. We are planning to release the next major release in a year. So we are very much interested in anybody that wants to help, because we still have that small team that took 4.5 years to develop the previous release. And so we're looking for developers. We're especially looking for documentation writers, anybody that wants to explain how the software works, or, make getting started with Xfce easier for any user. We need documentation. We don't have a lot of it. It's poorly written. Please help.
Where would they go for that to help out? Where would they start at?
I believe, let me just double check. Yeah, so on the top of the xfce.org website, there's a Get Involved section. You can click that link, and it's going to point you in the right direction, whether you're going to be doing development, translations, documentation, reporting bugs. That's the place to get started with any of this.
All right. Is that where people can get a hold of you as well, or is there other avenues they can get a hold of you?
If you want to get a hold of me or keep in touch with me, or just see what I'm up to, you can go to bluesaber.org. You can spell that either way. I own both domains because I know people will get lost otherwise. If you want the most up-to-date information, follow me on Twitter. That's where I'm most vocal, I guess. I post a lot of updates there, a lot of screenshots to get a lot of community feedback. I share a lot of cool things that are happening in the Xfce space.
Well, now that the host decided to forget to ask you,
oh boy,
and you brought it up, Blue Saber is your username. How did that come about?
So back in the day, I was a huge fan of like the Mega Man Zero series, Mega Man X. And basically there's a character on that called Zero, and he's just got this cool, effectively a lightsaber. I rolled with that.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, Sean, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been great.
And I just want to say thank you for all of the development that you do. The stuff that you do is not free. You don't get paid for it, but you're putting in a lot of hard work and a lot of time that is definitely not free. So that is much appreciated, man.
Yeah, I enjoy contributing to that. And like, I see a lot of like things on Twitter where people are sharing that, they're repurposing old computers with Linux, oftentimes with Xfce or Xubuntu.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really strong motivation for me. I feel like I'm doing the right thing.
Definitely doing the right thing, brother. All right. That wraps up our discussion with Sean Davis. Thank you all for joining us this week as we spotlight the best thing about Linux, our community. Until next time, long live Linux. Hello and welcome to the Linux Spotlight. This show is dedicated to showing off the best thing about Linux, our community. This community is made up of developers, distro maintainers, YouTubers, and everyday users. I'm going to start that over, because that didn't sound right.